So, welcome back from your break. I hope you had some nice food there too. Now, let's get on with Alex Muramoto. He's a dev advocate at Ionic, and he's going to tell you why it's awesome and why you should use it.
Cool. So, thanks. First of all, thanks to Jazoon for inviting me out to give a talk today about the Ionic Framework and Angular 2. If this works, let's see. There you go. My name is Alex Muramoto. I'm a dev advocate at Ionic. You can reach me anytime on Twitter or by email. Also, all of my code samples for everything I do are up on GitHub. So anytime I blog or whatever and have some kind of sample, it's up there. This is my dog back home in the States. She's really pissed that she couldn't be here with me in Zurich today. She's engaging in the time-honored American tradition of overindulging in cheap, terrible beer. Anyone here ever been in the United States before? Anyone ever had a Pabst Blue Ribbon before? Yeah, some people know what I'm talking about. I love it personally. There's a little bit of a trashy side of me that can't get enough. So let's start by talking about hybrid before we get into Ionic. So hybrid app development, it's awesome. When I talk about hybrid app development, I'm kind of talking about sort of the more traditional sense of the word, which is standard web technologies, HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS running inside of a UI, inside of a web view wrapper, right? So who here is not familiar with Cordova? Just real quick. Awesome. Who here is a JavaScript developer? Pretty solid amount, okay. Awesome. So why is hybrid awesome? First, you get to use, if you're a JavaScript developer or a web developer, you get to use your existing web skills. That means not only you have familiarity from the start with what you're doing, you also get to extend your existing skills into the mobile space. Kind of opens up a whole new avenue for your skills in your career. Also, single code base, right? The promise of hybrid has always been write once, code everywhere. This means you don't need separate code bases, Objective-C and Java for iOS and Android, right? Just write your JavaScript and it's going to run the same across every platform. Another big one, a little less talked about, hotfixes. So JavaScript can be loaded dynamically when you have a hybrid mobile app. That means that you can do everything from A/B test features to push bug fixes to even introduce very large chunks of new code completely dynamically on the fly into your apps with absolutely no App Store review either by the Google Play Store or the iOS Store. Pretty nice, especially for anybody who's ever done mobile development around Christmas time when the review times get pretty long. And mostly platform agnostic. The only reason why I say mostly platform agnostic, and again, all of the web developers in the room will know what I'm talking about when you know about the tiny little differences in how CSS can render between various browsers. And no offense to any Java or Objective-C developers in the room, but Java is terrible and Objective-C is gross. And I'd much rather stick with JavaScript personally. Don't get me wrong, I've done a little bit of Java and Objective-C development in my life. So let's kind of address the elephant in the room first, I guess, right? Historically, hybrid app development, especially kind of pure hybrid app development, has had issues. Some totally deserved, and some kind of based on misconceptions or even more so, bad code in a lot of cases. But a couple things. First, devices have evolved considerably over the years, right? This is just a little breakdown of where we've come since the iPhone 3, which was the main iOS device at the time when Cordova first hit the scene back in 2008, all the way up to the iPhone 7 of today. But even more so, web views have evolved. So when I'm talking about hybrid app development, I'm talking about your code rendering in a Chromeless web view, right? Starting in Android 4.4, we got the Chromium web view, which uses Google's V8 JavaScript engine, and starting with iOS 8, WK WebView, which gives us Nitro. Actually, Nitro is Apple's fancy branded name for their JavaScript engine. The real name is Squirrelfish, and it's the most amazing logo in the history of software development, in case there was any question. So this is a big deal, though. This is a really big deal for several reasons for hybrid apps. The first is that with the updated web views, right, especially in WK WebView, right, we get not just Squirrelfish, but Squirrelfish Extreme, which matched V8 in that your JavaScript now compiles just in time down to machine code. So your JavaScript execution, much, much faster than it used to be. Also, access to native scrolling. Scrolling used to be a big complaint in hybrid applications because scrolling was always basically being emulated in JavaScript, right? So there was some problems with stuttering and with jank. We get faster rendering, faster compute, and of course, access to the latest device APIs. So all that is great. It helps us out quite a bit as hybrid app developers. But the truth is that JavaScript for mobile is just hard, right? Out of the box, all you have is ES5, ES6, what have you, right? And there's a lot of things that doesn't come with that native developers get right out of the box. Things like touch events, right? When you run or when you open a mobile web app in your browser and you tap a link, that's actually interpolating as a click event, for example, and you get, someone else talked about this today, you get things like the built-in 300 millisecond delay, right? That is perceived by the user as a performance issue. So no native touch events, right? No things like tap, long tap, swipe, etc., right? No native UI components. Everything that you do in JavaScript or everything that you do in a hybrid application out of the box, just standard HTML, right? So you don't get things like what iOS developers get with UIKit, where a lot of those standard UI components are already there for you to just drop in. And of course, no performance optimization. So again, right, optimizing JavaScript for mobile is not impossible, but incredibly finicky in a lot of ways. Can anyone guess what framework this is on the left side of the screen? Anyone familiar? jQuery Mobile. So this is the mobile web app of a major tech conference in America, and this was just 5 years ago, right? So for a long time, right, this is all that we had, and a large part of the problem is so we don't have any of these things out of the box with JavaScript, and we don't have any kind of SDK to rely on to give us a baseline of performance and a baseline of look. But maybe even more importantly, what I kind of want to hit on is that when we're talking about JavaScript for mobile, out of the box we get no style. This is Rudy. He's actually one of our platform developers at Ionic. Looking pretty good. So no style. As a user, as a mobile user, right, you expect that an app will look, feel, and perform to a certain degree. And actually, it's really quite noticeable when it doesn't. So on the one hand, that JavaScript gives us no style is very problematic, right? Because it sort of exposes our apps as not feeling real, right? Not feeling like a proper mobile app. Many people will say that, especially back when a lot of hybrid apps kind of just felt like mobile websites, right? But on top of that, this is a big deal because the style of your app is the first major differentiator to the user, right? I mean, as developers, there's a lot of performance issues, for example, that maybe we perceive because we know sort of the baseline of how things are supposed to act. But for the user, a lot of it has to do with the look and feel, and so we need to get that baseline look, feel, and performance of UI components, right? Don't get that with standard JavaScript. So pretty hard. It's not like GeoCities website 1997 hard, and believe me, this is pretty hard. Fletch worked extremely hard on this site, but very difficult for us to achieve. And even if we want to do it, essentially, we're reinventing the wheel. So this is where frameworks come in. There are many hybrid frameworks available, as you've seen today. Xamarin, NativeScript, Ember.js, right? All totally awesome options for building hybrid apps. And personally, I think a lot of the choice has to just do with what language do you like? What framework do you like the look and feel of the most, right? So many options. Obviously, I'm going to talk about Ionic. So Ionic, it's a hybrid mobile framework, obviously, and it's built and written with AngularJS. So Ionic 1 was written in Angular 1. Ionic 2 is written in Angular 2. And Ionic 2 specifically, you can write it in ES6, but we recommend that you write it in TypeScript. And if anyone wants to talk a little bit more about TypeScript and its advantages later, we can totally do that. Open source under the MIT license, completely free to use for commercial use. It'll be open source forever. And the most important thing, I think, that I really want to drive home is that Ionic is completely built on web and browser standards. This is important for a few reasons. Number one, it means that not only is Ionic a great framework for building hybrid mobile apps, it's also a great framework for building mobile websites, and it's great for some of the things that are coming next in the mobile world. Who's heard about progressive web apps? A few people. So Google's been making a lot of noise about progressive web apps. These are web apps that will look and feel like native mobile applications. They'll even install an icon to your desktop, right? But they're completely served from the web. And for an Ionic app to become a progressive web app, essentially all you need to do is drop in a service worker and a manifest file. Since everything is built on web and browser standards, it already has everything that you need. So to try it out, we distribute the CLI through npm install-g Ionic. Also, you need Cordova for reasons I'll talk about more in a minute. I mean, obviously, you need Cordova in order to package up your app into a native executable, but there's a few other things. And then Ionic start, some app name, and then pass the v2 flag will get you a starter application that you can start working on. All right, so the first thing that most developers learn about Ionic, that they've seen about Ionic, is that it provides a big selection of UI components. I've lost count, actually, of how many there are. This is just a few of them. So things like side menu, date and time pickers, range sliders, card layout, a grid for doing layout, toggles, action sheets, pull to refresh, all kinds of the sort of native or the set of UI components that native developers get from their SDKs out of the box. So Ionic provides all of these to you, and I should mention that they are all optimized for touch events. So all of these will perform just like native. It'll be imperceptible to you. The great thing, though, is, again, no Objective-C, no Java. And who is not familiar with Angular syntax? A few people? So I'll be a little bit more descriptive as I go through. So all of the UI components in Angular are implemented as standard, in Ionic are implemented as standard Angular directives. So you get to drop them into your template files as just standard HTML tags, right? So all of these that I showed you here, you can see the analogous code up there in a few places. Also, again, style very important. So theming, we've made theming a very important tenet of the Ionic framework. Everything is written in plain CSS and uses the Sass preprocessor. So every single thing that you see in Ionic can be completely customized. Now, we've gone through great pains to ensure that all of the UI components that we provide, whenever possible, or whenever guidance is provided, conform to the style guides of material design and iOS, and we even have a Windows Universal theme. But you can make it look however you want. And the great thing about it is, again, plain CSS, so you can introspect any element in the browser, make whatever changes you want. I like to say you can make it as ugly as you want it to be. So very easy to override at both the global and the component level. Again, makes it a very nice way to theme your app, enforce the look and feel of your application, or of your sort of business's, right, look and feel. Variables based also to make things a little easier so that you don't have to introspect for CSS very often. Pretty much every single stylable part of every component has a corresponding Sass variable that you can update as well. And over 80 mixins are provided. To make things even easier, we also have an open source library called Ionicons. And Ionicons are almost 1,000 now, almost 1,000 icons that have been styled have been styled cross-platform. So you have iOS, Android, Windows Phone versions. Things tend to fall back to material design if there isn't like a Windows version of it. So you can use these in any project. It's open source. For access to native device hardware, we have well, in Ionic 1, we had a project called NG Cordova, which provided Angular bindings for using Cordova plugins that access the native device APIs. For Ionic 2, we have Ionic Native. So Ionic Native, what it does is, again, uses Cordova for access to device APIs. So that's things like the accelerometer, the camera, the GPS, the Bluetooth, NFC, what have you. Basically, with Cordova, anything that can be called from native code, you can expose to JavaScript. So what Ionic Native does is it wraps those Cordova plugins in TypeScript. This is really nice for a few reasons. First, you get static type checking, really nice for debugging and seeing errors before they happen. And also, it allows us to add promises and observables support. So anyone who's worked with Cordova before knows that some of the plugins can at times get a bit archaic, perhaps. And the callback pattern is still very prevalent, right? So Ionic Native kind of brings everything up to date and allows us to allows us to provide support for promises and observables. And last of all, completely framework agnostic. So it's called Ionic Native, but you don't have to use it in an Ionic project. You can use these TypeScript wrappers in any TypeScript project, Angular 1 or Angular 2, doesn't matter. Looks like this in code. So this is just a standard TypeScript import. We're just importing the plugin from Ionic Native and then calling, so anyone who's done HTML5 before or JavaScript has probably run into the geolocation feature in the browser. So just geolocation.getCurrentPosition and then being returned in the promise. Does that make sense to everybody? Anyone not familiar with JavaScript? All right, cool. So UI components, theming, native access to native hardware, all this is really awesome, but it really doesn't matter if it doesn't perform. That's the biggest thing for Ionic, right? We really use native as the yardstick by which as the meter stick by which we measure the viability and the performance of the framework. So we do very minimal DOM manipulation. Again, you get native scrolling, so 60 frames per second scrolling. All of the page transitions as you navigate in an Ionic app, 60 frames per second. Every UI animation that where possible is hardware accelerated, using hardware accelerated CSS. So all of the UI animations that you see in an Ionic app perform at or extremely near 60 frames per second, right? And again, everything is optimized for touch events. One really nice new feature of Angular 2 that we also take advantage of as of very recently, because it was introduced into Angular 2 very recently, is ahead of time compiling. This is actually a really great performance optimization. So for anyone who's not familiar, ahead of time compiling allows, so previously, when you ran an Angular application in a browser, the Angular code was compiled down to straight ES6 or ES5 or ES6 just in time, on the fly, in the browser. But now you can actually do that compilation at build time. This not only provides really nice performance improvements on app load times and also on component loading times when you're transitioning from view to view. It allows us to implement some other really nice features like tree shaking. So because we can do the static analysis of your Ionic code ahead of time, we can do tree shaking to remove any unused code. This can, in some cases, very greatly decrease the actual size of the bundle that you're deploying in your executable. So pretty big deal that the Angular team that the Angular team introduced that. We're really excited about it. So we predominantly do this work because we are a company of developers that was built by developers. Our CEO, Max Lynch, is the co-creator of the framework. And so we have three founders, and 2 of them are co-creators of the framework. And the third is the one who makes everything actually look good. So developers love Ionic. Over 25,000 stars on GitHub. It's the #1 TypeScript project, even more popular than Visual Studio Code, the official IDE of TypeScript. Kind of cool. Top 50 project. At various times, it's been top 20, top 25, goes up and down. But a really big thing for us, Ionic has a fantastic developer community. Hundreds of people have actively contributed to the framework and sent pull requests to improve the framework. Over 200,000 downloads or over 2,000 NPM installs happen per month, and that includes both. So 2 things. 1, that's just for NPM. 2, that includes Ionic 1 and Ionic 2, but Ionic 2 already accounts for over 25% of those monthly downloads, and it's been in beta. So we're pretty proud that developers are willing to give the framework a try even as it was still in beta. Just so that you don't feel like this is just some developer tool, right, that can't be used for much of anything else. Companies also really like Ionic. It's become a really popular framework to use both for customer-facing, for business-facing, and for internal-facing mobile apps. So this is just a few of the companies that are using it. And we like to at least hope that a major reason why the framework has had this kind of popularity is just because we're trying to do our part to realize the original promise of hybrid mobile application, which is code once, run everywhere, right? You have a single development team that can run one code base across every platform. This is also, by the way, particularly interesting for companies, right? Who's ever tried to hire an Objective-C or a Java developer? It can be really quite difficult, yes? Really? Not in the US. So JavaScript developers are by far the largest group of developers. So it makes the logistics of building mobile apps much easier. And also, when I say code once and run everywhere, I don't just mean, oh yeah, we have one code base, we throw it up there, and you know, Cordova makes it run on every platform for us. The styling is there too. So this is a screenshot from Ionic Labs. So I'll show you this in just a second live. But what Ionic does is it does platform detection, and all of those UI components that I told you about, it styles them to conform to the individual platforms absolutely for free. I did absolutely nothing to these views to make them look different across platforms. So you can see it's everything from the icons to sort of the look and feel of the tab bars. You can see the search bars are styled differently. The system font, right, is handled for you. Even very small things like the standard size of the standard height of the list items, totally handled for you. I should also mention that you might have noticed this from my other slide. We're pretty into Pokemon Go. Any Pokemon Go players in the room? So we have this drag and drop tool for prototyping Ionic 1 applications, and the guy who runs that team, his name is Matt Kramer. The guy's a super Pokemon Go player. He's like level 30. I don't know how he gets anything done. It's kind of amazing. All right. So, anyways, code speaks louder than words. So let's actually do something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build this. Pretty simple. Just a app that'll use some geolocation. It'll incorporate search in order to show you a list of nearby restaurants. It's about all that I have time to actually get done. But you'll see, right, scrolling, the reaction to touch events, all very fluid, okay? So just to start, what I have here is I've just taken care of a bunch of the boilerplate so that you don't have to sit here and watch me like write AJAX requests. So for all the people who are not used to JavaScript or who are not used to like TypeScript, I'll just kind of walk through everything real quick. First, the project structure. So you have node modules, right? It's a JavaScript project. You can get a lot of third-party dependencies to do various things that you need. But what we really care about is this source directory. So under that, in app, we have this app.component.ts. This is the core core component of your app. All right, represents kind of the single page, the controller side of the single page of your single page application. And then also down here we have an index.html, right? So this is just the HTML page that the application is injected into, which you see here with this ion app directive. The other thing that we care, so assets directory for all of your static assets that you want to put in there. I was talking earlier about progressive web apps. You'll notice that now we include a sample manifest file and a sample service worker file to get you going if you want to start playing with that. And down here, theme directory. This is where you don't have to do it here, but this is where we suggest you update all of those variables, the Sass variables I was telling you about. You'll notice, for example, here I've added one for Ionic. I'll use that a little bit later. Then the next thing is this pages directory here. Can everyone see this? Okay, great. So the other thing is this pages directory here. So every time you generate a page in Ionic, again, you don't have to put it here, but this is where we put it by default. So the project gets this default homepage. There's an HTML file. I'll walk through what's going on there in just a second, but this is the template, right? There's a Sass file. I just have about a dozen lines or so of boilerplate CSS in there, and home.ts. So TS is the extension for TypeScript files, and this is essentially, for anyone who is familiar with Angular 1, right? This is the controller of your app. Up top, all I'm doing is importing some dependencies. So Angular is component based, right? So that's the component. This is some basic Ionic dependencies that I'll need. I'll show you later when I use them. HTTP, which handles all of my AJAX requests, along with change detection for those in Angular 2, and RxJS, because why not, right? There's the component decorator. This just defines the selector and the template for the page, right? So the selector is the tag that's actually going to be injected into the DOM at build time. And that's where the page will live, okay? The template is just that home.html file that I showed you. And all of our controller code goes here in this exported class. I've just defined a couple member variables to hold the data that's going to come back from mostly the data that's going to come back from an API. So restaurants, and this is TypeScript, so I can type it. I don't have to, but it's nice to. So I'm going to get back an array of objects, and then I'm going to also implement search, so there's a string, right? In the constructor here, what's happening is I'm creating instances of a few of the dependencies. So I won't do page navigation today. If you want to hear about it later, I could talk about it. But that's what the nav controller is for. That's an Ionic thing. Creating an instance of the HTTP dependency, as well as platform. And you'll see why I'm using that in a second. Down here in IonViewDidLoad. IonViewDidLoad is a standard Ionic lifecycle event. So we have lifecycle events for basically a bunch of stuff, but especially for pages. We recommend that you use the Ionic lifecycle events rather than the Angular ones, just because we can for sure predict exactly when the Ionic lifecycle events will fire in an Ionic app. So for anyone who's familiar with Angular, this is the equivalent of ng-init. I'm calling a get restaurants function, which is defined here as a member function, all right? And then from there, I'm calling request. And request is down here. It just takes a location object. This is the API that it's going to hit to get the data. I have a conditional in case there's a search term. And then here is the actual HTTP request. And again, I'm not going to go through sort of like the details of how this works. But if anybody wants an Angular tutorial, happy to give it later on. Ignore this for now. You don't need to worry about it. Cool. All right. So let's do something with it. What I'm going to do to start is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to run inside of the project directory Ionic serve. This is just going to start up a little local web server so that I can start developing locally. All right. We'll give it a second. And it fires it up in my browser. So I could do this the old school way like we used to do in hybrid app development and say like, yeah, that looks like a mobile device. Sure, let's start developing. Instead, what I'll do is I'll use a really nice feature in Chrome. This right here, if I can get it sized right. So for anyone who's never done hybrid app development, Chrome has this very nice feature. You can emulate all kinds of different devices. So right now it's using an iPhone 6, right? So this Ionic serve will do live reload and all that stuff that you want. All right, let's actually build something. So coming back here to my template file, I have this header, and this just represents, right, that header, the app bar at the top of the application. And then Ion content represents the actual content below it. So inside of that, I'm going to create an Ion lit, not an Ion lissy, an Ion list. And inside of that, Ion item. So this is analogous to just your standard unordered list, your UL tag and your LI tag. The reason why we use the Ionic version of it is so that we get all of that performance optimization from the UI component that I was telling you about. And we also want this item inside of the list, right, to repeat for as many restaurants as we get back from the API. So for that, I use the standard. This is called a structural directive in Angular 2, and ng4 is the equivalent of a for loop, right? So I'm going to give it the array of restaurants, and it's going to just iterate and create a new list item for every item in that array. So I say let restaurant of restaurants, right? Remember, restaurants was the name of the array. And I save. And it's live coding, so I hope it doesn't fail. Cool. So now, if I come back here, did it do it? Wait, is it done? Maybe not. There you go. It just didn't reload. So now it's a little hard to see on the white screen, but you can see, right? I'm actually getting list items for everything. So now I need to put something in it. To do this, so that you don't have to watch me write boilerplate, I am going to engage in the time-honored tradition of our profession as developers and use copy and paste. Don't pretend you don't do it, you bunch of cheating Stack Overflow users. I know you do. All right, so I save this. And actually, while I wait for that to reload, I'll explain this. So this is an image, right? A little thumbnail image to go with it. This is a one-way data binding in Angular 2. So I'm just saying set the source tag to the thumbnail property, right, of each restaurant. And then these double curly braces, for anyone who's not familiar, represent two-way data bindings in Angular 2. So just the values will be inserted into the DOM for each of these things, right? Other than that, standard HTML, right? Let's see. I don't know why it's not actually like reloading, but there we go. All right, there's a mobile app all done. Let's all go have a drink. Yeah? No, probably not. Actually, I did this in Seattle, Washington recently, and I got to this point and people applauded, and I said, don't you dare applaud. People let me off that easy. All right, so, you know, we've got stuff there. It doesn't look super good or anything, so we probably need to improve this a little bit, I think. So I'm going to do, for layout, I'm going to use that grid component I told you about. And this, so Ion Grid, and this is very much the same for anyone who's familiar with the grid system in Bootstrap, right? So I declare a grid, and then inside of the grid there's a row. Save that, wait for that to finish recompiling. There we go. Better. Not super great, right? So real quick, I'll just mention that Ion Grid uses Flexbox. That's the underlying CSS technique that it uses. So I need to make this look a little better. So I'm going to do a couple things. So first of all, right, I want to resize each. I want to make sure that everything kind of has nice spacing. So I am going to change to this. Oops, I don't want to go down that far. And all I'm doing here is putting columns inside of the row, right? So the only thing that's different is these Ion column tags. And I'm going to size them. So I have width 25, and then down here on this one, I'm going to say width 20. And I can just declaratively resize these columns. Cool. Wait for it to reload in the browser. Unless I made a syntax error. Doesn't look like it. There we go. Almost there, but we have a few problems. First of all, right, like this one's kind of running over, it's overflowing out of its column, right? And then also, like, it'd probably look nicer if this was flush right over here. We don't have any stars for the reviews, right? We just have the number 2. So let's fix that. So first of all, down here, I'm going to turn this to text right. And up here on the item, on the Ion item, I'm going to say text wrap. Next, I'll walk through what this does in just a moment. All right, so all I'm doing in order to get my star ratings right is I'm using Ion icon. That gives me access to all those Ionicons that I showed you earlier. And to tell it which one I want, I just give it the name of the Ionicon. And then I'm telling it to repeat for as many times as the number that's returned in restaurant rating, right? So this is where that get array that I told you to ignore earlier comes in, because ng4 can only actually iterate over, guess what, an iterable. So what I needed to do, right, was create a little helper function that's just going to return an array of that size so that it can iterate on that, all right? So I'm gonna do that. And one more thing real quick. Basically the same thing, but for the price. Wait for it to blend. Did I have an error? Oh, I have an error. All right, oops. Oh, on price, gotcha. Forgot to close my parentheses. And here I thought I was so safe copy and pasting. Huh? Yeah. Cool, all right. Oh, did I still have it?
There is this, at the end, before the bracket, there is
yeah.
column.
Oops, okay. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the miracle of light coding. I hope you enjoyed the experience. I highly suggest that you try it sometime. All right, cool. So now we get our nice layout. Next, I mean, this is cool to find. I mean, these are all in Madison, Wisconsin, where Ionic is based. I mean, yeah, that's nice to see a list of things in Madison, Wisconsin, but let's do something a bit more interesting and add geolocation. So the first thing I need to do to add geolocation is I need to include the Cordova geolocation plugin in my project. To do that, I say Ion plugin add, and then the plugin name. So it's Cordova plugin, oops, plugin geolocation. And I actually already ran this because if I had a Swiss franc, for every time I brought down conference Wi-Fi using npm install, I would have a lot of Swiss francs. So it's already done for me, which means that up here at the top of my home.ts, I can import it. So I say import geolocation from Ionic Native, right? And again, TypeScript, so it knows that it has this dependency available for me. And then down here in get request, I'm going to do a couple things. So first, I have to make sure that the platform has that the Ionic platform has fully loaded before I call anything. I call any Cordova plugins, right? I have to make sure that it's actually loaded Cordova. So that's where this platform dependency comes in. So I say this dot platform dot ready. It returns a promise. And then once this promise returns, I call geolocation.get current position, which also returns a promise. And the promise the promise returns me a location object, which I then pass to this dot request. And I'm totally a cheater. So let's comment that out and recomment this. All this is changing the query string that's appended to the request, right? So now instead of automatically passing the latitude and longitude for the Ionic office in Madison, Wisconsin, right? I just have a template string that's passing the coordinates that come in from that geolocation object. Save this. Wait for it to build, which will take just a minute. I've never spoken with one of these crazy things before. It kind of makes me feel like I'm in a boy band. Should I sing? I can kind of dance, sort of. I can do the my code is failing dance. That happens. All right, cool. So let's see if this actually returned back. So now you see I'm getting results in Zurich, right? So any lag that you see in this app actually rendering is entirely to do with my crappy little API, my crappy little Express API that I built. All right, one more thing. How many minutes do I have left?
7.
7, perfect. All right, I just want to include search. So here at the top of Ion content, I'm going to say Ion search bar. Couple things. I'm going to bind. So Ion search bar just creates a search input for me that you saw in the original. So I say ng model. So I'm just binding the value of the input to something on the model. So I'm saying bind to search term. And then I'm going to bind to Angular 2's click event. And I'm going to say when the search event is fired, call get restaurants, right? So essentially what's going to happen here, when somebody types into the input, it's going to set that value on the model search term. And then when they actually click, it's going to fire the search event, which is going to call get restaurants, which will get a new geolocation, right? So we can kind of live update our app, make sure I don't have any problems. Cool. So I don't know about all of you, but after 60 minutes of listening to my own self-talk, I need a drink. So let's look for a bar. Oops. Let's see. Sorry. I have a typo. So here, it's get restaurants instead. Damn, I really wanted that drink too. All right, let's wait for it to reload again. Cool. So now, whenever it's done, there we go. Now let's see if it works. So look for a bar. Obviously in a real world app, right, I would want to put in some sort of progress spinner. Also another Ionic UI component that you can just drop in. So now I get my bars. Right? Thank you. So real quick, awesome seeing it in the browser, but I probably want to actually like look at it on a device, right? So you have a couple options here. You can, you could do the deployment dance, right, and deploy to a physical device. That means on Android you have to enable developer options, which I cannot tell you how to do on your Android device because it's usually some combination of going into a magical set of settings, tapping about phone between 5 and 50 times until it gives you the fancy message that tells you you've enabled developer mode, and then you have to enable USB debugging. On iOS, even more complicated. You have to create a provisioning profile, you have to code sign the IPA and Xcode, then you have to npm install a dependency called iOS deploy, and you have to have a $99 a year developer account. And I know what you're all thinking as developers, $99 a year, outrageous. So, as of iOS 9, actually, you can do the deploy without a developer account. So this is a write-up that I did at this link. That'll tell you how to do that, all right? So now you can actually get into hybrid development, test on both Android and iOS, see what you think, don't have to pay any money. Pretty nice. We also offer a free mobile app called Ionic View. And all you have to do with Ionic View is go to view.ionic.io, has links to the various app stores, you can download it, and when you work on your Ionic project, you can just run Ionic upload from the CLI inside of the project directory. That will upload the bundle for your project to an Ionic server, and it will spit you back an app ID that you can use to view it in Ionic View. This is really great, actually, especially if you do a lot of work, like contract work, for example, because it makes it very easy to share with clients, right, the work in progress. It also makes it very easy to show what you're doing to your stupid manager who probably can't get a provisioning profile to work on his phone. So there's that. This is the app ID actually for what I just built. So if you want to try it out yourself, you can use this app ID until I work it, but I will actually make it work. So, this was my, this is my phone actually running. And all I'm gonna do is come back here and say Ionic run iOS -- device. A bunch of magic happens under the covers. This will take just a second. This one, right? So actually all this time I've been running this in Ionic View, if anyone's curious. A lot of magic has to happen during this build process. Again, we're doing all of the ahead of time compiling and such. Actually, while we wait for that, oh wait, is it almost done? It's gonna need a second. All right, while we're doing all that, let me just say real quick, if you want to learn more, we have really awesome docs, both for V1 and V2. We're gonna continue to support V1 for a very long time if you're an Angular 1 developer and you're not quite ready to make the jump. Although, good news, Angular 2 didn't make the world burn down. So we're pretty happy about that. And if you haven't tried Angular 2, you absolutely should, it's awesome. Blog, very developer focused. We post like tutorials and stuff there all the time. Twitter, and who doesn't need a little bit more Twitter? So Ionitron, who's this little guy right here, is our nice little build bot. He's a cool guy. And that's a really good way to stay up on what's going on in like the changelog and such, all right? Also, if you fancy yourself of the open source variety, please do contribute. Everything in the Ionic Framework is open source. The framework, Ionic Native, the Ionic CLI. I can't contribute to the CLI because I'm terrible at Bash, but maybe you're good. So if you're into that, fantastic. And so you didn't actually see it launch, but this is the app that we just built actually running on the device. And we did all of that with 35 lines of template code, about 50 lines of controller code, and 13 lines of CSS. And we created a pretty nice start to a mobile app experience. Totally performs, right? Real quick, two days ago at Angular Connect, we announced that Ionic 2 went into release candidate. That's a real release candidate, by the way. So we know that as it gets out into the wild, people will find bugs and we'll fix them. But we didn't go to release candidate until we really felt confident that you could use this in production. So if you're thinking about using Ionic 1, but you were worried that Ionic 2 was in beta, it's definitely worth trying, okay? And Angular 2 is much better than Angular 1. So pretty exciting for all of us I'm in California, but everyone else back in Madison. That's it. Thank you very much. Again, if you have any questions, you can reach me anytime. I'll happy to answer questions you have about TypeScript, Ionic, Angular, Cordova, what have you. Cool. How do I turn this crazy machine off? There we go. Awesome.
Thank you very much. It was a nice talk. Thanks. So we got... You excited?
I am.
Okay, nice. Just don't bring them on a plane. That's going to be not so cool.